So, despite FNAF 4 being referred to as the final chapter, I don't think many people even really bought that at the time. With 4 games on the trot, all of which were very successful from an indie point of view, and clear potential to become an IP even more massive than it already was, we essentially knew there was always going to be something coming down the line eventually. And sure enough, only 1 year after the release of FNAF 4, the hype train was once again set in motion with the announcement of a new Five Nights at Freddy's game. This one not being given a new numeric value, as opposed to the previous 4 games, with it instead being referred to as Five Nights at Freddy's Sister Location. And while that may have initially made it seem like some kind of spin-off, Sister Location ends up being far more integral to the overall plot than a game like FNAF 4. I feel like the removal of the number from its title may have simply been indicating the new direction Cawthon was now taking the series. Today, FNAF 4 still remains the last game in the series to feature a number on the end of it, and as you're about to see, I not only think the ultimate departure from this naming system stems from the gameplay department, but in a story sense, I also find it appropriate when it comes to aspects like how the general tone is handled with each subsequent game, and the introduction of new elements and characters that we've never seen or heard about before. The game begins with a short opening cutscene, hearing the voices of 2 unknown men discussing the capabilities of what we can assume is the animatronic that's gradually getting revealed to us on screen.
There's no doubting what you've achieved on a technical level. These are clearly state-of-the-art. There are just certain design choices that were made for these robots that we don't fully understand. We were hoping that you could shed some light on those.
She can dance. She can sing. She's equipped with a built-in helium tank for inflating balloons right at her fingertips. She can take song requests. She can even dispense ice cream.
With all due respect, those aren't the design choices we were curious about, Mr. Afton.
So as you can hear, one of these men, who remains unnamed, is questioning someone called Mr. Afton about certain design choices in the animatronics. This basically confirms 2 things. The first to be the fact that this Mr. Afton is primarily responsible for creating all the animatronics we'll see in the game, which sound like they're holding something particularly morbid in terms of how they've been designed. And also the fact the other man who's talking to him is actively questioning him, which more than likely means he works as a superior to Afton when it comes to whatever company's running the operation we're about to witness. There's one key thing which I should bring up, however, and that's how we actually know who Mr. Afton is, and have seen him countless times already. While I'm not going to actively focus on them, because most of what they convey is fairly self-contained, the very first of now a long line of books was released for the FNAF series. The book was called Five Nights at Freddy's The Silver Eyes, and much like all the books that have been released throughout the years, they're essentially non-canon. I see many fans confused as to the ultimate relevance of these when it comes to the storyline conveyed in the games, but from what I gather, the most important detail that's revealed is in regards to this Afton character in the very first book. Cawthon at the time described how the Silver Eyes, and any future books, are canon, but are in their own continuities. So, to put it more simply, they all have a purpose in their own right, but that purpose doesn't apply to the storyline we witness in the games. You might as well describe it as a multiverse when it comes to the books. They're doing their own thing, and that's fine. However, this only became more apparent as more and more books were released. The Silver Eyes was the very first one, and despite its ultimate insignificance to the games once again, due to how it takes place in an alternate universe, the identity of Afton is something that remains consistent, as can be seen during Sister Location's opening cutscene, and that's how Afton, or William Afton as he's referred to in the books, is the real name of Purple Guy. Now, it's a nice detail to know, but you might initially think it's actually quite irrelevant, whether we're calling him Purple Guy or William Afton. How does his name impact anything? Well, with everything we've seen up till now, it doesn't really, at least not in relation to things we're already aware of. As we're about to find out, however, Sister Location starts diving even deeper into more of the unknown details that have previously been left floating around, with the name Afton not becoming relevant simply in regards to William, but also some of his other family members too. Getting back to the game's switch up in style, we could already see this from the teasers and trailers that were released before the game, but even when taking a look at the main menu screen, the switch in style was immediately noticeable, especially coming off the back of FNAF 4. The music we hear is actual music, not the typical droning ambience that usually plays, and alongside these brand new and what seem to be metallic animatronics that flash up on screen, I'd say there's definitely a futuristic feel that's given off straight away. The animatronics appear to have advanced substantially. From the brief flashes we see with each of these, the endoskeleton contained inside them all isn't the same one we're used to seeing. Unlike the ones we saw in the first 2 games, these skeletons are made up of what seem to be a huge amount of wires, all of which overlap each other. All of the characters' faces have many gaps contained within them, which, as is implied from those flashes on their insides, tells us that compared to the suits that we normally normally saw placed onto the previous endoskeletons, these characters have been built around the endoskeleton, with their exterior plates being able to open up separately. Each of their skeletons no longer use the same generic model, but are instead uniquely designed for each individual animatronic. We'll get into this stuff more when getting a better opportunity to look at them all, but for now, I'll just say the main menu doesn't do a great job at setting a scary atmosphere. It's lacking essentially everything I enjoyed about the several previous ones that came before it. The animatronics are shown clearly, with no real obscuration. The music sounds more intense, compared to ominous and creepy. While the game should obviously do most of the hard work when it comes to scaring the player, setting the tone is very important in that regard, and I'm not sure the word scary would ever come to mind with this menu. When starting a new game, we get another potential shock before we even see anything, and that's the voice of a child calling out to her dad.
Daddy, why won't you let me play with her?
With no real idea what that could be referring to currently, we're brought straight into what seems to be our first night, where immediately we hear even more talking from what sounds like some sort of automated guide.
I will be your personal guide to help you get started. I'm a Model 5 of the Handyman's Robotics and Unit Repair System, but you can call me Hand Unit.
First off, I want to say that Andy Field, the voice actor here, does a great job. This guide remains a constant throughout the whole game, and additionally, we'll end up hearing this voice return several times over the next two mainline entries. While I can imagine some finding this performance somewhat annoying, I land on the side who find it charming and genuinely quite hilarious at points, and that mainly comes about from the deadpan nature of many line deliveries.
Welcome back for another night of intellectual stimulation, pivotal career choices, and self-reflection on past mistakes.
But what I'm yet to point out is that we've got two instances in a row of some brand new voice actors. It makes us realise that throughout these last 4 games, the only voice we've heard is Phone Guy and Phone Dude, both of which were taken on by Cawthon. And while it is refreshing somewhat to hear these new voices, I think I'd equally argue the lack of them was debatably a big part of why the first games were so scary. The feeling of isolation was absolutely key. Hearing another human's voice was reassuring to a certain degree, but even then, all we were hearing at the end of the day were messages. We weren't communicating with them directly. Cawthon's voice performance as Phone Guy was also pretty outstanding. He makes what initially seems like a reassuring voice sound increasingly nervous, mysterious, and untrustworthy, which felt like it reinforced the fear in game occasionally. I know this is only the second instance of someone outside of Cawthon talking in these games, but just keep this in mind when continuing forward, as I believe voice acting, while more effective in terms of conveying information and showcasing characters' emotions, can find itself really sucking the fear out of points because of the sheer abundance of it, and the context in which it's applied. Looking away from that for now, our guide, who we learn is referred to as Hand Unit, doesn't fill us with a great deal of confidence during his introduction.
Welcome to the first day of your exciting new career. Whether you were approached at a job fair, read our ad and screws, bolts, and hairpins, or if this is the result of a dare, we welcome you.
Something you'll notice straight away when sitting in this elevator is that in regards to where we're looking, it's now quite a bit more tied towards where our cursor is on screen. For example, while in all the previous games we could move our eyes left to right depending on what side of the screen our mouse was on, we can now also look vertically too. This doesn't change things up too much, to be honest. I'd say there's only 1 or 2 instances in the game that take full advantage of this increased amount of observation, but it is still worth noting, considering how I feel it does feed into Sister Location feeling like a slightly more conventional experience compared to the previous games. And I would say that's a negative factor. The series isn't losing its identity per se, but it's stepping away from what made it so unique in the first place. After opening up the elevator doors, things get weird straight away. For some reason, the only way we're able to get to work, as the Hand Unit puts it, is through a tight vent shaft which we can see at the bottom. Not only that, above the vent shaft is some bright yellow and black tape reading danger, almost appearing like the same tape you'd see at a crime scene or something. Making our way into the vent, we're made to realise what it is we're actually doing. From what we're told by the Hand Unit, it's unclear when exactly Sister Location is set. He mentions how after the closure of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, there was now a hole waiting to be filled by another animatronic-based children's entertainer.
Due to the massive success, and even more so the unfortunate closing of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, it was clear that the stage was set, no pun intended, for another contender in children's entertainment.
We obviously know both FNAF 1 and 2's restaurants were called this same name, so for now at least, it still seems like FNAF 3's the entry that takes place furthest in the future chronologically. After this, our job's laid out quite clearly, which also works in showing the different approach this company's taking towards the animatronics.
Unlike most entertainment venues, our robotic entertainers are rented out for private parties during the day, and it's your job to get the robots back in proper working order before the following morning.
Perhaps because of what happened to the Freddy Fazbear establishments. This company's built a business model around animatronic rental, instead of a restaurant that keeps several animatronics inside. People can now come to whatever company's running this operation, ask for a particular animatronic, and have them delivered to private parties before having them returned once the party's over. Our role is in maintenance, which has all our nights playing out substantially different to what we've seen before. It's no longer a case of monitoring the animatronics throughout each night. Our job is simply to check on them, ensure they're ready for tomorrow, and leave. What we see here is basically our office, but we essentially spend next to no time in it. As you could already basically tell, Sister Location isn't a survival game whatsoever. It's turned into an outright adventure, and with each night, there's going to be brand new threats and gameplay scenarios we have to deal with, which on the surface sounds great, but we'll eventually see how I also think there's an argument for the gameplay to feel less impactful overall, and even worse, for it to feel far less scary. This first night is the most routine, being told to check on 2 stages to our immediate right and left, as well as one that lies beyond the vent shaft in front. The way in which we check on these guys though does set an off-kilter atmosphere straight away. It's not merely a case of turning on a light and seeing the animatronics are there, despite how the hand unit makes it sound. When checking on the character Ballora, for example, whose stage is on the left-hand side, she's initially not there. The hand unit actively responds to this, appearing to be some sort of sentient AI system, and encourages us to employ what he calls a controlled shock to get her active.
Uh-oh. It looks like Ballora doesn't feel like dancing. Let's give her some motivation. Press the red button now to administer a controlled shock. Maybe that will put the spring back in her step.
And sure enough, when applying the shock, Ballora's then shown dancing on stage. I understand it's almost a given at this point that whenever we see animatronics in these games, they're more than likely going to be acting funky, but it's taken as a given by the hand unit, and in turn, by the game itself. What do you mean Ballora doesn't feel like dancing? It's a robot, it should be dancing all the time if it's programmed to. All this is intentional, of course. It makes us feel that something's not quite right immediately. And equally, that shock we activate on Ballora, and subsequently Funtime Foxy, who's on our right hand side, it feels like we're torturing them to act this way when they don't want to, which doesn't seem like it will do us any good when inevitably running into them. We repeat this process once more after heading into the vent, shocking an animatronic referred to as Circus Baby and checking on her, although for some reason, despite hand unit implying that Circus Baby's now falling in line, we never actually see her.
Great job, Circus Baby. We knew we could count on you.
Again, quite ominous, but there's nothing to worry about for now, mainly because when making our way back through the vent, our shift is marked as complete, and we're told to enjoy some time at home. Hilariously, that's taken to a literal degree in this case. We're not taken directly to the next night, but instead, somewhat like the 8-bit moments in the previous 2 games, we get a short interlude where our character's shown watching TV at home, the programming of choice always being a show called The Immortal and the Restless, which centers around a vampire called Vlad and his wife called Clara.
Clara, I tell you, the baby isn't mine.
Now for me, it became apparent straight away that this wouldn't be here for no reason. I get that we've already seen some pointless gags during the first night, but this technique is one that I've once again seen be used several times in other pieces of media, using the fictional format of a TV show or book, for example, to reflect the events that are occurring in the actual story. We'll explore later on what these scenes represent and who certain characters are being attributed to, but for now, looking at the events on screen literally, this character Vlad tries to claim that this vampire baby is not his, and plans to abandon both him and Clara. That's all there is to say, and at best, the only connection we can make at this point is that Vlad appears to be wearing a purple jacket, and continues to do so in each of the TV segments, seeming to draw a link between him and William Afton straight away. Moving on to the next shift, the voice of the girl comes back, still asking her father why she can't go play with something, with that something more than likely being an animatronic.
Daddy, you let the other children go see her. Why won't you let me go?
Pair that up with what we've just seen from the TV show, and it's not a long shot to say this could potentially be William Afton's daughter. After all, if he's the one who's created all these animatronics, he'd likely try keep someone like his daughter away from them. He is a serial killer though, so who knows actually. On yet another elevator ride down to our place of work, we're made to set the preferred voice of our hand unit, and with the touchscreen being totally broken, our answer's given automatically.
It seems that you had some trouble with the keypad. I see what you were trying to type, and I will autocorrect it for you. Thank you for choosing Angsty teen.
Upon reaching our office for the second time, I feel like it should be said that from a stylistic point of view, I feel like we're taking another pretty big leap from many elements that gave the series an identity in the visual department. Not to the point where someone would look at the game and not make any association to FNAF, but still missing certain key elements that help define the series. I'm talking about things like the checkerboard floor patterns, the party balloons, sparkles and confetti, the iconic desk fan. I get that these things weren't featured in FNAF 4 either, but in that case, we're talking about a game with a wildly different context to any of the others. We were playing inside a child's nightmare in that one. Every other game prior to that, as well as Sister Location, has us working in a job revolving around a pizzeria and animatronics. Take the elevator for example. Aside from the posters on the wall, is there anything that particularly stands out here which I define as having a Five Nights at Freddy's look? I'd say no. You remove the posters, and while Cawthon's style is still noticeable when it comes to the pipes, the elevator doors, and some of the buttons scattered around, I could attribute this environment to a game like Desolate Hope. This applies even more so to the office. Aside from maybe the fan in front and mask that hangs on the wall, there's nothing here I would characterise as fitting in with the series' prior look. The colour scheme's similar to FNAF 3, but that's about it. Add that to the major switch up in how the gameplay's carried out, and you're left with something that feels almost nothing like the original games outside of the point and click nature of them. Now with that being said, I've already stated how I'm in no way opposed to evolution. I'm purely coming at this from an observational point of view. There's not much here aside from the animatronics that I would point out as being your classic FNAF visuals. In no way would I say they look bad either. In fact, there's tons of details I think are really great when it comes to the environments. Looking back to the elevator for example, take note of how many moving elements can be found in this scene. Before, we've been mainly used to the fan being the only thing that would move in our office, with FNAF 3 only switching things up slightly when it came to the movements Phantom Freddy and Springtrap could make. In this elevator, you've got the fan at the top which spins around, creating a nice shadow effect on the walls and floor. You've got the background behind the doors that's constantly moving as we descend, and we can also see the posters flapping around at the bottom. Might seem small on the surface, but these kinds of details go a long way in making these environments feel even more alive. Same goes for the office. There's the fan in front, the stacked screens at the top of the room, and also the weird faces on the left that are constantly moving around. And talking of them, that's something else this game exceeds with: interactivity within the environment. Previously, there's only been one thing we've been able to interact with, and that's Freddy's nose. Iconic, yes, but in a more adventure-based game like Sister Location, you'd hope to see some more. We're not locked down to one sole office. The new areas we witness are travelled to by us, not simply being observed through a camera screen, and as a result, interacting with many different things in the game will result in a piece of audio playing. Whether it be a beep from a keypad, a robotic sound from one of the heads, or whatever this is. There's just so much more to play around with. Once again, it seems small in the grand scheme of things, but appreciated nonetheless. So long as the environments themselves aren't getting sacrificed, which they most definitely aren't, these interactive elements are only ever an improvement. I know I clarified how I think everything still looks good, but I want to reinstate that I do also mean that from a stylistic point of view. It is taking a step in a different direction for the FNAF series in numerous facets for me, but it still has all the style I recognise in Cawthon's previous work too. Getting back to our second night on the job, we go through our initial checks with the angsty teen guiding us in the back. And this is where I start becoming conflicted on when, where, and how the horror comes into play. Needless to say, coming off the back of FNAF 4, which I found to be one of the most horrifying games in the series, I was naturally taken aback when we start the game off listening to this goofy hand unit and dealing with the animatronics like we're ticking chores off a checklist. The build up so far has not been scary at all, but it has been interesting. Fitting in line with my appraisal of the visuals, witnessing the animatronics performing on stage was a bit of a revelation, because although we've seen them move around during trailers, Foxy in the first game, as well as FNAF 3 and the slight movement in the hallways during FNAF 4, those remain the only times outside of a jump scare we see them move around. They're typically statuesque and most definitely aren't shown performing on stage. And while I wouldn't say the movement takes away from the scare factor, I definitely wouldn't say it adds to it either. There was always something quite frightening about the positions we'd find these guys in, even looking away from some of the scary faces and postures they'd morph into. It was like we caught them doing something they weren't supposed to, and instead of reverting back to their normal position, they would stare right back at us. Nothing in Sister Location has been overtly scary so far, and I'd also say that from an atmospheric point of view, I wouldn't say there's anything particularly unsettling in what we've seen or heard. There's a feeling that something's coming in the near future, but I almost wonder if that's merely an expectation because of the series I'm playing, and not because of what's conveyed in the game itself. Getting back to our work with the angsty teen, during our usual checks, it seems like Ballora and Funtime Foxy have now become more aware of our presence, both appearing to be standing right by our window, and during these checks, the angsty teen voice starts glitching out, before eventually being replaced with the default hand unit voice.
Great. Great. Great.
Again, it's things like this where I don't really get the intention. I've always thought that angsty teen malfunction is pretty hilarious, but simultaneously, I don't think it's trying to be in this case. It feels like one of the first times where there's an attempt to unsettle the player, and I don't think it's pulled off very well. I could be wrong, of course, maybe it is supposed to be funny, but with hindsight, I'd say the experience on the whole struggles somewhat to remain consistently scary. When checking on Circus Baby, the controlled shock appears to malfunction as well, resulting in the hand unit restarting the system and leaving us in complete darkness for a while. There's another problem that starts getting highlighted during this, and that's how the gameplay so far has been absurdly dull and basically non-existent. I get we're only halfway through night 2, but even in the case of Fnaf 3, where there was literally no threat during the first night, I not only had problems with that decision to begin with, but you at the very least had the camera system to play around with, and were given the chance to observe the layout of the location and mess around with the mechanics. Because Sister Location's even more linear, having to go from point to point only when being instructed to, we've got no choice outside of simply sitting back and watching, and that wouldn't be a problem if things were consistently scary, or we had some other gameplay mechanics to mess around with. But so far, it's literally been a case of clicking buttons when we're told to, and waiting around while someone talks, and that ultimately continues during the system reboot, now getting spoken to by what seems to be Circus Baby.
I don't recognize you. You are new. I remember this scenario, however.
She describes how she's surprised anyone would take a job like this, and warns us that we should get into a hiding spot in front due to how someone's coming after us. First off, we're witnessing an animatronic speak for the first time, which is not only crazy, but I also find it dampens that alien quality they previously held. And on top of that, this animatronic is actually helping us out. Very strange. The talking's something we're gonna have to get used to as these games go on, because from here on out, even when it comes to some of the animatronics we've already seen before, voice lines start getting applied to almost all of them.
You won't get tired of my voice, will you?
And I'll be honest, I'm not a massive fan. I get that giving these guys voice lines was likely done for a functional and stylistic purpose. Perhaps Cawthon simply wanted to experiment around with getting new voice actors involved. He's already shown that so far with the little girl and hand unit. But even during our initial talk with Baby, notice how she reveals details like how she hasn't seen us before, and how the hiding spot in front of us was crafted by someone who previously worked here.
There is a space under the desk. Someone before you crafted it into a hiding place, and it worked for him.
It's conveying the story and laying down hints in a more objective and easily conveyable way, much like the phone guy did, but in a more constant and reactive manner. These aren't pre-recorded messages. Baby's actively responding to the situation we find ourselves in. So yeah, I get why we've progressed to a point where the animatronics are given voice lines, something that remains the case for most of the ones we see here. But does that make them more scary to me? No. In fact, I think it detracts from how much I fear them. Anyway, coming back to the moment where we hide for a second, sure enough, there does turn out to be a few animatronics that come our way. I suppose this whole sequence is creepy in some sense. The whispering voices of these currently unknown characters is quite ominous. They know we're hiding inside here, talking to us, tapping on the metal casing, and even peering in through many of the holes that are scattered on it. All that stuff can be genuinely quite freaky. There's intent shown from these guys that they want to get inside and murder us. And from this initial encounter at least, there's still an unknown factor to them. We don't know what they look like, how big they are. All we know is that something's out to get us, which makes their attempt to pry open the metal cover really intense. Gameplay-wise, there's still nothing to see here. It arguably makes it more impressive to me that I feel a sense of helplessness and fear in this segment, as all we have to do is click and hold the metal cover as they try to make their way inside and you'll be safe. Beyond simple, but it's the way in which it's executed that's key, having each of their attempts open up the cover more and more, eventually reaching a point where you think you're going to fail, which still remains intense every time I come back to the game. So that's a definite success in my opinion. On the surface, you've still got gameplay that I find totally unimpressive, but because of the scenario we're placed in, the tension's still there. I'm still engaged in what's going on. Luckily, things do start getting quite a bit more interesting after this, however. Baby tells us that once the system's restarted and the hand unit comes back online, he'll tell us the reboot was unsuccessful and that we'll have to crawl through Ballora's room to restart it manually.
When your guide comes back online, he is going to tell you that he was unsuccessful, that you must restart the system manually. He will then tell you to crawl through Ballora Gallery as fast as you can to reach the breaker room. If you follow his instructions, you will die.
The key thing she notes is that he'll tell us to crawl through the room as fast as we can, whereas Baby claims that we should move slowly, carefully, and stay still when Ballora comes near to us. And sure enough, when the hand unit comes back online, he says exactly what she describes, even down to the speed in which we should move at.
It is recommended that you stay low to the ground and reach the other side as fast as possible as to not disturb Ballora.
I love the setup. It leaves us in a strange predicament where we don't know who to actually believe. Do we really trust Baby? She's an animatronic. We've only had bad run-ins with these guys in the past. But she did also help us hide from the others, which were clearly out to get us. Equally though, the hand unit doesn't appear to be human either. And on top of that, he and the facility we're in hasn't appeared reliable at all up to now. System restarts not working, getting information wrong. Despite our initial instincts, it seems that following Baby would be the more logical thing to do. Either way, heading into Ballora Gallery, we'll find out pretty quickly who's right and wrong by dashing forward. So, following Baby's advice, we reach what I perceive to be the first proper gameplay segment, one where we need to carefully make our way to the door on the other side of the room, while stopping and starting in accordance with how close Ballora is to us. What we have here is a good setup being executed in a very basic way. Audio is once again the key to our survival, outside of one sole moment where Ballora makes her way across our screen, which is a brilliant visual by the way. It's all about only moving forward when Ballora's song dies down. No matter whether it plays in the left or right audio channel, all that matters is you don't move when the song starts getting noticeably loud. And that's it really. Ballora lets out a tune and you stop moving when it gets too loud. There's not much to see in a visual sense. Aside from our flashlight which lights up the floor and the light which illuminates the doorway, everything else is pitch black. There is a subtle ambience in the back, another bassy drone that gives a nice feeling of tension, but I'd say most of the tension comes from the scenario itself, and also the amount of control we're given when making our way forward. Even though it's an absolute disadvantage in this case, we can dash forward by holding shift if we want to. We are the ones who decide when we should stop and start, and I think risk-taking is something which applies to this scene, and also the one that follows on from it. The sequence isn't as scary as several other ones we previously witnessed, but it is still undeniably tense. The fact we can't ever get a good visual on Ballora is one thing. We're having to rely on audio, and don't truly know how far away she is from us. Much like the other musical tunes we've heard in the series, there's also something ominous to the music Ballora's giving out. It fits in line with her design, sounding like music which would play during a ballerina's performance, but in this context, it's simply a reminder of how close we are to our death. You've also got the sounds we create when crawling along the floor, adding to the tension of us getting discovered. And not to mention, halfway through our journey across the room, Hand Unit will inform us of how we're taking too long.
It seems you are taking a long time. Please proceed as quickly and as quietly as possible.
Being a surprise in itself, but also creating even more dread in the potential scenario the sound draws Ballora towards us. Overall, I'm nonplussed. For everything I think it does well, I still don't find it to be all that impressive. The sole gameplay mechanic here is akin to red light, green light. There's no depth whatsoever. Our failure is likely what I describe as the best part of the segment, because of how quiet everything is prior to the jump scare, as well as our potential failure being relatively up in the air the entire time. I always feel like it's a genuine shock, unless you're purposely dashing forward obviously. Exactly. Without our failure, what do we have here? A section where we stop and start across a dark room until we reach our goal. Tense, yes, but is the gameplay all that good? No, not really. And this also applies somewhat to the following gameplay segment, having to restart the systems in all rooms across the facility, while Funtime Freddy, who's also found in the room, will gradually start moving towards us. On the surface, it appears like another case of risk and reward, and it only somewhat is. In the top right, we can see there's a danger meter, ranging from green to red in terms of how safe we apparently are. When pulling up the maintenance panel and restarting a room, the danger meter starts going off the charts, which is oftentimes accompanied by the sound of Freddy moving, and having him change position upon pulling the monitor back down. The only way to counteract this is by calming him down, which we can do by playing an audio track of Baby telling him to go back to sleep. And when breaking it down, the gameplay here purely revolves around a cycle of red light, green light once again. You'll find that regardless of what room you're resetting and how many you've already completed, you can typically fully reset a room, reset Freddy until the danger meter's green, and then go for another room. Rinse and repeat that several times and you win. So from that point of view, I'm unimpressed once again. The replay value is getting heavily dampened in this case. It's not like the previous games, where you could know how to beat the toughest knights in the game, but still majorly screw up. Once you know what you're able to get away with, there's realistically nothing stopping you from completing it every time. I think there should have been a bigger consequence in relation to the time you're taking, or how many times you play the mascot audio, because as it is, it's just too simplistic in my opinion. Now, that's looking from the point of view of how it works from purely a mechanical perspective. I still would say the scenario in itself holds great potential to scare the living daylights out of players, and I'd say it once again stems from the intense silence of the scene. The ambience is so pared back that every sound almost becomes an event. When pulling up our monitor and having it start beeping when resetting a room, it can feel incredibly tense, especially when you start hearing Freddy move around. You've then got the room and the way in which Freddy navigates it. Our environment's still basically pitch black, with only the briefest of flashes illuminating certain parts of it. Players will obviously find themselves wanting to keep an eye on Freddy and check how close he is to them. That can turn things even more terrifying as you put your monitor down and see that he's now standing right in front of you, appearing like he's about to pounce. Overall, I'd say it's a step in the right direction. Despite there being an optimum strategy for you to reliably complete it, that most definitely won't be apparent from your first blind attempt, because we're given basically nothing to go off except to use the audio when he starts moving around. It's more unclear what we can and can't get away with, and while the gameplay isn't mechanically deep once again, I have no issue with that in this case, as what we have instead is a fantastic dynamic getting created between the time in which it takes to reset a room and the sounds which are generated behind our monitor. We want to get out of this room as soon as possible, but equally, we also have to be somewhat methodical and careful when resetting the rooms and monitoring Freddy's behaviour. So on the whole, despite Night 2 initially appearing like it was going to be a rinse and repeat of the first night, I'm glad to at least be seeing new types of gameplay scenarios being given to the player. Are they as deep as what we've seen before? No. And there's no real depth when looking at them in a vacuum either. But what they lack in that department, they make up for in narrative progression and what it makes the player feel. This isn't the last we'll be hearing from characters like Baby, and in our first interaction with her, we've already started questioning what the intentions are of these new animatronics, and why she felt the need to help us out. A good setup going into the upcoming nights. My only real issue that I want to bring up is the consequence of failure, and how it differs to what we're used to. Before, it's been the same formula every time. You start at 12 AM, and if you die anywhere in between 12 and 5, you're made to restart the night all over again. As this structure's now been entirely changed in Sister Location, we now work off a more conventional checkpoint system. So if you die in the Ballora section, you're taken right back to the point before you enter Ballora's room. My only issue is, this same consequence also applies to failing in the Freddy section as well. That remains the case for some of the other gameplay sections in the upcoming nights. And while on paper, it should realistically take less time to get back to where we were compared to sitting through a whole night once again, it doesn't feel satisfying whatsoever. The experience in the previous games felt continuous. We always restart at the exact same point and are made to deal with the same threats. Failing to Freddy and then having to deal with Ballora once again is just a bit annoying. We've already beaten that challenge and have moved on to the next one, so making us do it again feels odd. Add another checkpoint for when we enter Freddy's room and there wouldn't be an issue. With that, our shift is complete, heading back home to enjoy some more quality entertainment. During the second episode of The Immortal and the Restless, Vlad still tries to claim the baby isn't his, and for the vast majority of the clip we see, there's nothing to really garner from it. However, there is something right at the end that fits into the idea of Vlad being a representation of William, as Clara says that he works the graveyard shift at a taco place. And as we now know, William also worked the graveyard shift, not in a taco joint, but at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza.
They can't do that. I'm a vampire. I don't get paychecks.
You work the graveyard shift at the Fry Me Taco. Don't lie to me.
Oh, the humanity.
Night 3 begins with more encouraging words from the hand unit.
Welcome back to another pivotal night of your thriving new career, where you get to really ask yourself, what am I doing with my life? What would my friends say? And most importantly, will I ever see my family again?
And he most definitely makes us keep wondering what we're doing with our life when being told our pay's been decreased due to our supposedly shoddy performance last night. Something which I haven't mentioned till now was the label that's been placed on our broken hand unit that pops up at the beginning of each night, outside of activating some casual bongos for us to enjoy.
Casual bongos.
We can see it's been assigned to someone called Mike, who we can assume is who we're playing as. And where have we seen the name Mike before? If you remember, back in Fnaf 1 when being given our paycheck, it was addressed to a Mike Schmidt. So it's natural to assume the same Mike Schmidt we played as in that game is also the same guy we're taking control of now. As for why he's decided to come back to a place that's so similar to one that almost got him killed is unclear, but it's clear from his appearance in the first place that he's likely got a bigger role to play than most other characters we've seen. As for what we do in Night 3, things get off to a good start when performing our usual chores. We're already informed that we're going to have to go through Funtime Foxy's room to perform maintenance on Freddy, but when looking at both Foxy and Bellora's rooms, there's once again a disconnect between what we see and what we're told by the hand unit. Bellora does appear on her stage, but she appears to have been taken apart, with her individual body parts being disconnected from each other, and as for Foxy, he's just not there. Before heading into Foxy's room, however, we're given the choice to go check on Baby. When hiding in the metal container, we're told about how Baby only had one opportunity to perform on stage, and was programmed to count all the children she was observing.
Did you know that I was on stage once? It wasn't for very long, only one day. What a wonderful day, though. I was in a small room with balloons and a few tables. No one sat at the tables, though, but children would run in and out. I would always count the children. I'm not sure why. I was always acutely aware of how many there were in the room with me. 2, then 3, then 2, then 3, then 4, then 2, then none.
This is where we see the importance of that opening cutscene, and what William's true intentions were with the animatronics. Because as Baby describes, once she identified there was only one child in the room with her, she would use her ability to make ice cream to lure the child in.
Something happened when there was one. A little girl, standing by herself. I was no longer myself, and I stopped singing. My stomach opened, and there was ice cream. I couldn't move, at least, not until she stepped closer. There was screaming for a moment, but only for a moment.
And from the screaming she said took place after, we can assume that Afton created these with the sole purpose of being killing machines, luring children in, grabbing them, and trapping them inside their stomach. We'll get even more insight on that design choice later in the game, but for now, it's time we made our way through Funtime Auditorium. Just like last time, it's a case of making our way through a pitch black room to a door on the other side. The difference here though is that instead of having to stop and start in accordance with sound cues, we've now been given a flash beacon and have to use visuals to assist us. Boiling it down, it's the exact same red light green light routine realistically, but from what we're actually shown, it's still pretty damn terrifying. I understand how the overwhelming darkness can present a fear in itself, but I think you do actually need to see what could potentially kill you to up the ante even further, and that's exactly what happens. In fact, the only way to get through safely is by seeing Funtime Foxy. Now, although we're not given any real guidance this time, we can at least listen to what the hand unit tells us and try do the opposite, and while there's not much to garner from what he says either, he does tell us to to use the flash beacon we've been given as sparingly as possible, and as expected, in reality, using it frequently actually works to our advantage. All we need to do is move forward, flash, and if Foxy can't be seen anywhere in front of us, move a bit more, flash, and repeat. For a gameplay sequence that has us doing relatively the same thing, the sounds Foxy creates and the way in which he appears in front is truly terrifying. When moving forward, we constantly hear him running around the room, and unlike Ballora, who utilizes separate audio channels, we're made to have no real idea of where Foxy actually is in the room. The sounds of movement that are played don't seem to correspond to his actual movements. You could see nothing, hear nothing, then flash your beacon and he's standing right in front of you. What's worse is that when we do see Foxy, the way he behaves creates a similar animalistic feeling which I felt about the nightmares. While his body remains perfectly still, his head frantically moves all over the place. So I think what we get here is an active improvement over the Ballora gameplay segment. Sound and visuals are getting utilized well to keep the player on edge. And much like we saw with Funtime Freddy, the flash beacon we're given that we're solely in control of adds an additional weight to our actions. Just like how we're paranoid about the lack of vision and beeping sounds created by the maintenance panel, the same can be said for the flash beacon. Having this bright light emanating directly from our position, as well as being accompanied by a piercing sound that makes us feel like every time we use it, we're almost asking to get killed. And talking of that, you would have seen some of the jump scares so far, and for me, despite still not being as impactful as what we saw in FNAF 4, I find the way they're set up and executed to work really well. Perhaps it comes from the more linear nature of the game, or maybe just the way these gameplay segments are carried out, but man are these some genuinely shocking jump scares. We've discussed before how the build-up should all come from the atmosphere. It should be placing our mind in a position where we're cautious of what's going on around us, but have no real idea if and when something's gonna strike. Almost every gameplay section we've had so far fits into that, with the one exception of when we had to hide and keep the metal cover shut. In that case, it felt like the jump scare could happen at any point, and while that same sentiment applies to the others, we also have no way of preparing ourselves. Funtime Foxy is the prime example. Every time you use the flash beacon, it can be the difference between life and death. Much like Ballora, if you sprint across the room, it's not going to be scary because you already know you're going to get jump scared. But when getting jump scared while in the process of actually trying to achieve our objective, these are excellent. The setup's great, but the visuals and audio are equally superb. When it comes to the screams, while always being loud, there's a good deal of variation to them now, whereas Ballora has a fairly simple high-pitched mechanical scream. Freddy's is lower in pitch and almost sounds more like a growl. Either way, despite there still being an overlap between some of them, it's nice to not have the exact same sound repeated over and over like we usually hear. And as for the visuals, while still being varied, there's a trend which carries over to a few of these that makes them excel beyond the rest, and that's the ones which show the animatronics' facial plates opening up, revealing their internal endoskeleton, compared to some of the others in the game that simply show the animatronic popping up in front like usual. That additional element of having their faces open up doesn't just look impressive from a visual standpoint, but there's also an element of the unknown introduced that I feel creates an even bigger impact and makes the scares fresher, and as a result, even more scary and unusual. We're so used to having the jump scares reflect the animatronic itself, so it's unexpected when they open up their faceplates and have us looking at something that appears equally, or perhaps even more terrifying. Outside of that, however, it's your usual FNAF jump scare, a short animation of a shocking visual and an absurdly loud scream. Moving on from Funtime Foxy, after reaching the other side of the room, we're brought into parts and service. Much like most of the other rooms we've been in, the area is pitch black, with the only thing illuminating the darkness being our flashlight. The maintenance we're performing is on Funtime Freddy, who ominously sits right in front of us. And the gameplay here is about the same level as holding the grate shut, underwhelming and far too linear in my opinion. We're guided through the entire process by the hand unit, telling us what buttons to press and where they're located.
Great, now carefully locate and press the button next to Freddy's right eye. Great.
There are some scares hidden amongst the sequence, like the audio that plays when opening the faceplates, but I have no issue with that, as I in fact think it's an effective way of keeping the player off balance, while not overdoing the scare to the point where it feels cheap. But from the interactive side of things, the most we have to tussle with is a brief moment where Freddy's Bonbon hand puppet goes missing. Bonbon will gradually reveal himself from behind Freddy, so long as your flashlight isn't pointed directly at him, and from there we have to simply press his top button and we're done. Very easy on the surface, but still possible to mess up. If you take too long to find Bonbon, he'll jump scare you, requiring you to go through Funtime Foxy's room once again. A segment that's almost the definition of style over substance. I like the look of the scene because of how close and personal we're getting to Freddy. gameplay, but it's another one that when you boil it down, isn't really satisfying on a gameplay front. The big difference when it comes to how Night 3 finishes ends up occurring when making our way back to the vent. No matter what you do, Funtime Foxy will always jump scare you, but instead of being taken to a game over screen like usual, we instead awake inside of an animatronic suit. It's never made clear who this suit belongs to, but from the sheer fact we're placed inside of it and haven't been killed in the process, we can assume it's one of those old multi-purpose springlock suits we've seen before. Baby starts talking to us, saying that she's the one who hid us inside the suit, presumably saving us from getting killed by Foxy. And that's where it's revealed that instead of heading back home to watch more of our TV show, Night 4 takes place here and now, with the timing of the usual jingle we hear being hilarious in this instance.
I have you hidden too well. I kidnapped you.
Night 4 is by far the most infamous night in the game, and arguably one of the most infamous moments in the entire series. We'll see exactly why that is in a second, but for now, Baby talks a bit on the springlock suit we're in, how we found ourselves in a place called the scooping room, and shortly after, we see what the purpose of the scooping room actually is.
You're in the scooping room. Do you know why they call it the scooping room? It's because, dummy, this is the room where they use the scooper. I thought that would be obvious.
Some workers seem to bring another animatronic into the room, with their natural dialogue making me realise that essentially every single voice we've heard throughout the series so far has sounded so bizarre and unnerving in about every way possible.
What happened to it this time? It just seems like these things can't go a day without breaking down. Who knows? It's always the same, man. Some kind of hardware malfunction.
This animatronic's revealed to be Ballora, and shortly after she's moved to our left-hand side, the scooper gets activated, and with a few strikes, Ballora seems to be completely destroyed. And that's where the gameplay part of the night's introduced, arguably being the night that forms the closest resemblance to the nights of the previous games. Baby opens up the faceplates on our suit as a way of revealing us to the camera we can see flashing in front. All we've got to do from here on out is wait to be rescued. But of course, it's not as simple as that. Shortly after the faceplates are opened, all of the spring locks to the right and left of us begin unwinding, which Baby says is due to our breathing and heartbeat. And from there on in, it's mainly a case of time management for us. There's 10 of these spring locks in total, 5 on both sides, and the main thing we need to do across the whole night, which lasts around 3 minutes, is wind them up as much as we can, while ensuring none of them fully unwind. We know when one's about to unwind fully when the spring lock starts flashing red, and with all these spring locks being presented in a circular fashion, it's a matter of the yellow circle moving clockwise until it ends up back at where it started. Now I'm aware there's many who really dislike Night 4 from this concept alone, but it gets even worse. While handling all these spring locks, Ballora's small friends, who are known as mini-renas, start climbing up and inside the suit. As for the ones that begin flooding in through the center, you can't do anything about them, with the result of that being how the spring locks start winding down increasingly fast. There's also ones that crawl up on the side of the suit, however, and with these, you've got to briefly wiggle the suit until they fall off. Failing to do this results in a jump scare, but the wiggling itself also makes the spring locks suddenly unwind quite a bit more. So, with that being said, it's all up to you how long it takes for you to get past the night. The strategy's clear as day. Keep the spring locks wound up while wiggling as infrequently as possible. But there's no mistake. Even for someone like me who's completed this night quite a few times already, I still found myself messing up several attempts before completing it. And as I said, that's primarily because it's all based on how you choose to wind up the spring locks and when you choose to wiggle the suit. Because of how the mini-renas speed up the unwinding process, there's absolutely no way you'll be able to spend the whole night keeping every single one fully wound up. It's just not possible. So you're basically having to naturally gauge when you should start leaving these spring locks a quarter undone, or maybe half undone, so that all of them can be wound up more equally and not result in you failing. This can be very difficult though, and I completely understand why people find this section really hard to get past. You've got 10 of these individual spring locks to deal with. The fact they're spread across 2 sides makes it harder to gauge how undone all of them are without wasting time, and the wiggling we perform to wade off the mini-renas only amplifies all this even more. To complete it effectively, you have no time to question what you're doing. You've got to be as methodical as possible. Going back and forth winding up the spring locks will be too ineffective. The best approach is to focus on all of them individually on one side and then try balance it out on the other. I'll be honest though, I think it's great. It's not scary per se, but it can get damn tense when you start getting to the later stages of the night. It's been constructed in a way where by the time the night's over, essentially every one of the spring locks will be flashing red and almost be undone. The visuals of the mini-renas climbing on our suit and the destroyed Ballora Ballora with her glowing red eye is ominous, but most won't be paying attention to that obviously. The gameplay segment's simplistic, there's no two ways about it, but it's also incredibly engaging and challenging in a way where I wanted to actively pursue it and get to the end, compared to other instances where I'd much rather just turn off the game. Every time I come back to it, I'm left feeling it's damn near impossible for a certain period of time, but by the time I reach the end and see just how close I was to failing, I'm then left appreciating the fine balance of the scenario, and how fine margins can result in your ultimate success or downfall. Can it be annoying? Yes, of course it can. But you can say that about anything that gets thrown at the player which has a great deal of challenge. As it is, for a section that I know many despise, I have no real issue with it. As the mechanics are so simplistic, there's nothing to really talk about on that front, but when it comes to the overall process of reaching the end, I find our involvement in it and the control we have over our survival to be tense. We're left questioning when we should stop winding one spring lock up and go on to the next one, or if wiggling at a certain point will be more detrimental than needs be. The time management aspect of it is superb in my opinion, and is the key reason as to why it's so challenging. Bear in mind, we have no idea of how long the night lasts this time. You can set up a stopwatch yourself of course, but that's an external piece of guidance that you're providing. When it comes to the game, we start getting a feeling of how long's left when it comes to how low our spring locks are getting, but we still can't be absolutely certain. Add the clock in, and you could immediately start formulating more of a plan, and figuring out where you should be with each hour that counts down. Without it though, you're purely working off estimates of how long you've got left, and what stage these spring locks need to be at so you can survive. And then in terms of surviving the night, the feeling we experience is very similar to that of the power shutting off in the first game at 5 AM. Just like in that case, the feeling of relief when the screen fades to black, and we get the celebratory shift complete music is immense. But even then, it's arguably even more impactful compared to the example in the first game, because of the unknown factor that remains from beginning to end. There's no indication of us possibly surviving because we're at 5 AM, and that's what I mean about the excellent balance of the night. Once you reach those closing seconds where all of the spring locks are flashing red, you're likely going to find yourself hopelessly abandoning any plan you had and frantically start looking out for which spring lock is the least wound up. You're almost made to accept your fate, which makes our completion even more satisfying than it otherwise would be. So on the whole, I'm a big fan of Night 4. It is pretty damn tough, but that's why it works. The challenging nature of it is what makes it a success to me. Without it, you've still got the creepy visuals and stark ambience, but decreasing the difficulty would inevitably make the gameplay far less engaging. It's going off a design principle which I really appreciate in doing more with less. There is nothing really impressive about the sole mechanic being 10 circles that we have to wind up, but it's the dynamic that's created between them, the mini-arenas, and the lack of any timer that turns the gameplay section into one of the most tense in the series, and the eventual completion into one of the most satisfying. And with that nightmare out the way, it's time to head back home, getting to watch the penultimate episode of our favourite TV show. The key piece of information lies at the end once again, with Clara saying she purposely set their house on fire.
Well, the joke's on you. I set the thermostat to 90 before I left.
Good, I like it warm.
Good, because I also set the house on fire.
How will it all end?
The only fire we've seen in the series so far is the one that burned down Fazbear's Fright, so naturally, we're now being told that whoever Clara is in the actual story is the same person who burned that place down. We'll discover more towards the end of the game who this actually is, but for now, it's time for our final day on the job.
Please enter the first few letters of the gift basket you would like to receive. It seems you had some trouble with the keypad. I see what you were trying to type, and I will auto-correct it for you. Thank you for selecting Exotic Butters.
With our gift selection of exotic butters out the way, we're told by the hand unit that along with our daily routine, we need to tell 2 technicians that are still in the building to go home. Interesting initially, we can assume these 2 guys are likely the people we heard from the previous night, which could potentially mean we're about to see some actual humans for the first time in the series. Making our way into the office, however, it doesn't go down like that, as when checking on Foxy and Ballora's stages this time, we see the silhouettes of these 2 technicians, lifelessly hanging from a rope.
Great. Now let's check on Funtime Foxy. Great.
A chilling image straight away. It's quite obvious they aren't going to be responsible for this, which makes us question who is. And while there's nothing to really go on right now, there is one detail on our office that you may notice has changed, which works as a hint as to who the suspect is. The mask above the fan in front is missing, with it being unclear who took it and why they needed it. We're asked to go perform maintenance on Baby in parts and service, but you'll find when making your way through Foxy's room this time that there is no Foxy. It seems that while we've been away, not only has Ballora had had to endure the dreaded scooper, but it seems like with the disappearance of Funtime Foxy, he's also been destroyed as well. Arriving in parts and service, Baby sits in front of us much like Freddy did the last time we were here, telling us how she's broken and will soon be taken to the scooping room and destroyed.
Can you hear me? I'm pretending. Remember how I said I could pretend? The cameras are watching. I must be careful not to move.
On top of that, it's revealed that Ballora is apparently in the same room, and when shining our flashlight next to Baby's arm, we can see what appears to be several wires swaying back and forth behind her. This fits in line with how we're told Ballora won't return to her body, but that's where it should be said that what we're currently seeing isn't technically Ballora at all. We'll discover in a second what this thing actually is, but for now, Baby tells us to open up her cheek and enter a passcode on the small keypad that reveals itself inside. Upon doing this correctly, we're given a keycard, which will apparently allow Baby to keep talking to us through our hand unit. We then send her off to the scooping room, in which we can then get the faintest visual of the animatronic that was standing behind her. And while it's still incredibly hard to see, let me show in much closer detail what's standing in front of us. This is a character known as Ennard, and much like I speculated a second ago, he appears to resemble one of the several endoskeletons that we've seen inside of all the animatronics we've come across so far. Ironically, there's a reason as to why he appears like this and doesn't have a suit like the others, and we end up discovering this upon following Baby's instructions and eventually arriving in the scooping room. Inside, we can see that all of the animatronics have now been scooped, with only their outer shells laying on the ground. Through the window on our right, we can see Ennard staring at us, with it being revealed that he was the one who took the mask in her office, almost like he's trying to wear a suit of his own despite not having one. And obviously, the reason for that is that he's not a real animatronic. While we can't see any of the wiry endoskeletons of the characters lying on the ground, we can see them when looking up to Ennard. That's right, this jumbled up beast isn't Ballora, as Baby tried to make out. He's a new entity that's been created from all the animatronics endoskeletons combined. It's why we can see that unlike the other endoskeletons we've seen previously, they seem to have these wires neatly laid out in rows and being uniquely designed for each separate character. Ennard has tons of exposed wires sticking out all over his body. His facial features appropriately appear like an amalgamation of all the other endo heads, and we can even see that he's got an additional eye hanging off his right arm. This all fits into Baby's talk with us that closes out the game. In getting us to enter the scooping room, we've been tricked essentially. Baby refers to Ennard as a collective we, and says they plan to use the scooper on us so they can climb inside our body and hopefully find a new home. The state they're in currently would simply result in them getting destroyed, but in using our body, almost as a makeshift suit, they can continue to live on.
There is nowhere to go when we look like this. But if we looked like you, then we could hide. If we looked like you, then we would have somewhere to go. The scooper only hurts for a moment.
And that's exactly what happens. Mike gets taken out by the scooper, and when arriving back home, we're made to look in our bathroom mirror. And as we can see from our bright purple eyes, it seems they achieved their goal effectively. So that's the first ending of the game, but much like FNAF 3, there's actually multiple we're able to see this time, which can be seen in this final night, as well as the custom night, which finally makes a return. First off, there's a whole load of loose ends we're yet to tie up. So let's start with the one that's followed us all the way through the game. Just before we're shown the final reveal in the bathroom, we hear one final piece of dialogue from the little girl, who we've assumed is William Afton's daughter. We essentially get confirmation that the girl we've been listening to was the same one that Circus Baby offered ice cream to, before subsequently trapping her inside her body.
Don't tell Daddy that I'm here. I wanted to watch your show too. I don't know why he won't let me come see you. You're wonderful. Where did the other children go?
A nice reveal, but in the grand scheme of things, what's actually the significance of all this stuff? We've gone through the whole game witnessing these brand new animatronics that we've never seen before, and only really get bits and pieces that relate to the overall story. That's where the alternate endings and secrets come into play massively, however, as these end up revealing some pretty huge details that end up clarifying aspects like who Mike Schmidt actually is, what he intends on doing in the future, and also entirely changing our perception of previous games like FNAF 4. We'll start by going over many of the secrets secrets hidden amongst the game, as they're not only plentiful, but many also hold a great deal of significance. As has been the case with all the previous games, despite the game's structural changes, Sister Location still fits in tons of unique visuals that only have a small chance of presenting themselves. These would be things like the animatronic known as Bidybab, who can sometimes be seen staring at us during the initial elevator ride. A similar effect can be seen in several environments from the mini-arenas, having a chance to show up in places like our office and at home, with the Bidybab also having a chance to show up there as well. Even more creepy instances can occur from here though, as coming back to the office and Funtime auditorium sections, there's a chance for a secret animatronic to appear in both rooms. The first is one known as Lolbit, whose head replaces the mask in her office. We'll be seeing him more in the custom night section, with that also going for the one we find in Funtime auditorium, with there being a slim chance that during night 3, where we have to make our way past Funtime Foxy, that he'll be replaced by an endoskeleton referred to as Yendo. Talking about that second ending, however, the way to unlock it lies beyond another 8-bit minigame, one that we can either access randomly when experiencing a game over screen, or once the game's complete, we can head to the extra menu that unlocks and play it whenever we want. As for the extra menu itself, because of how the custom night is now given a separate tab on the main menu, what we see really is just some behind the scenes screenshots of how many of the animatronics were made. Still interesting to look at, and especially when it comes to characters like Circus Baby, it's nice to get a proper look at her design, considering we only get one glimpse of her disheveled suit right at the end of the game. Outside that, we get some nice stills of some of the environments, and also exotic butters.
Exotic butters.
Getting back to that minigame though, we're put in the shoes of Baby, and are given the task of handing out cupcakes to all the kids in the several upcoming screens before the time runs out. Unlike the other minigames we've played before, however, this one can be incredibly difficult to pull off properly, and is mandatory to complete to get that second ending. It's not just that we've got such a short amount of time to do everything, it's also how there's a particular order in how you feed the kids, and if you mess up at any point along the way, you're gonna have to try again. Miss a cupcake, you failed. Collect a new set of cupcakes too early, you failed. There's 3 variants here, a pink one that shoots out normally, a blue one that shoots out 3, and a green one that feeds the kids instantly. From that, you should be able to see from each screen which cupcakes need to be used on certain screens. But again, this consists of going back and forward, making tight jumps over certain cupcakes that we have to save for later, all the while having screen transitions like this, which are very blatantly inserted to troll the player. It's definitely not easy, but when we eventually manage to feed all the kids, you'll be able to pick up an ice cream that sits right beside the goal, and by taking it all the way back to the start of the level, we witness a physical representation of what happened to William Afton's daughter. There's one more secret I haven't mentioned up till now, which makes these events and the animatronics we witness appear even more morbid. We've known for a while that all of these have been designed as secret killing machines by Afton, but when playing through the entire game, there's a couple secrets that remain as constants throughout the experience, one of which is still considerably rare, and the other which is quite literally occurring all the time. During any period of silence in the game, you'll more than likely hear what sounds to be some kind of deep groan playing in the back. Bizarrely, this audio plays throughout the entire game, and when being sped up, is revealed to be Circus Baby saying the numbers 1578. As for what it means, remains unknown. Although there is another secret that can be found during the second night when holding 0 and 1 on our keyboard when in Ballora's room, where after a minute or so, our screen will turn completely blue, and will eventually show a screen with hundreds of alternating numbers. As I say, it's not clear what this all really means. The only other time we've heard about numbers in the game is in relation to Baby counting the amount of children she sees. Outside of that, I merely perceive it as more mysteriousness from Cawthon that would go on to receive huge amounts of speculation, which inevitably will never get answered. As for the other detail I was talking about, however, with every room we enter throughout the game, there's a 1 in 10,000 chance that one of 4 blueprints will flash up on screen. These relate to Baby, Freddy, Ballora, and Foxy. On the surface, it doesn't actually seem like there's too much to say, outside the further confirmation of William's involvement from the Afton Robotics copyright text at the bottom. These blueprints appear to merely show off each animatronic's capabilities and nothing more. However, when looking at Baby and Freddy's blueprints, there's a very morbid secret hidden which we can just barely make out. Even when you know where to look, it's still hard to make out because of the grid-like pattern, but looking to their stomach areas, you'll almost notice these lines start clumping up in a way that models like Foxy and Ballora don't have. Highlighting parts of this section, however, ends up revealing a shocking discovery, because as you can see, inside both Freddy and Baby, there's a distinct outline of a childlike figure. In the grand scheme of things, it doesn't mean that much, considering we already know that was their ultimate purpose, but it's a disturbing visual to witness, as well as further confirmation that this was always William's true intention. As for the second ending, after completing the minigame, we have to go through Night 5 once again. However, during the stage where we need to follow Baby's instructions to reach the scooping room, if we instead head to the right, we'll eventually hear that we've been given access to another room.
Access granted.
And when fading up from the darkness, the environment we're placed in is one that resembles many of our previous offices far more closely. The desk fan, the Fredbear doll, the metal doors with big red buttons beside them. Something's been going on behind the scenes that we've been totally unaware of. And this is where some of the strangest revelations are shown to us. We'll get onto how the gameplay scenario plays out in a second, but as you're able to see from what's shown in front of us, there's a few TV screens and a keypad on the wall beside the poster. Entering the year 1983 onto this keypad, which we obviously know relates to Fnaf 4. The screens show 3 images, one of the child's bedroom, one of the corridor where Plushtrap would sit, and one of the bed. This is just outright insane, as it directly contradicts what was so blatantly conveyed in Fnaf 4. The environment we're placed in during that game, while not being 100% confirmed, was very clearly supposed to be the internal nightmares of the comatose crying child. So to all of a sudden be told these environments actually exist is crazy. Not to mention as well, when observing the screen that's looking at the bed, we can even see the flashlight illuminating the scene and creating a shadow behind the Freddy toy, now heavily implying the events of Fnaf 4 were in fact real. I don't buy it though, because of how clear the intentions were in the previous game. I have to assume this is simply another attempt from Cawthon to keep questions getting asked that have no real answer. I understand that in the years since Fnaf 4 and Sister Location came out, the books have presented the idea of a hallucinogenic gas that could have caused the kid to imagine these nightmare animatronics were coming after him when they really weren't. As a result, Fnaf 4 is painted out more as an experiment compared to a nightmare, and there's no doubt that's most definitely backed up in Sister Location. Not just from these screens, but you may have also noticed during the section where we reset all the rooms, the map that's shown on the right hand side featured 3 areas that were all completely detached from the main sections, and looking at their layouts as well as how they've also been listed as observation rooms, you can see the maps of the bedroom and hallways, the Plushtrap corridor, and even the same map during the 8-bit section where we make our way home from Fredbear's. It's all bizarre and pretty interesting on the surface, but falls apart when taking Fnaf 4 into account. No matter what theories you personally want to come up with, which is all fine in my book, I see the switch up here as nothing but a blatant retcon. It all made perfect sense in Fnaf 4. The nightmare animatronics that seem to have no other purpose than to just look scary, the injury sustained by the child, and the secret items that you could see by the bed. This is one of the only issues that can start presenting itself when you purposely convey your story in the most obscure manner possible. It can already be frustrating when trying to piece everything together in the first place, but to then have details that appear to have a clear answer be flipped on their head, it starts feeling like almost anything is possible, and as a result, could lead to some becoming disinterested. It could have the opposite effect on some, of course, spurring them on to find the true meaning to all these things. But if we're looking at this from an objective point of view, if there's no solid answer to find, and no sorts of themes, metaphors, or meaning to be garnered, these changes start seeming almost pointless. So Fnaf 4 wasn't a nightmare, and was an experiment instead. So what? How does that develop the story and make it more interesting? I don't think it does. It keeps people asking questions, but at the consequence of putting your previous game in no man's land. How do I now perceive Fnaf 4 when coming back to it? As an experiment I'm forced to partake in? Well, that's not the story that's conveyed. There's nothing in the game that comes even close to alluding to that idea. And that's my main problem, really. If there was at least a hint of this possibility in Fnaf 4, I could at least accept what I'm seeing in Sister Location. But there isn't. It's a full-on 180 that to this day still has fans scrambling around for answers, and looking to the mostly irrelevant books for a solid answer. You had one in Fnaf 4, why convolute it? As you might have guessed from the layout of the gameplay we experience, the section here is very similar to Fnaf 1 in particular. We've got a camera system, a power meter, a clock, and 3 doors that we can close to keep us safe. And I'll be honest, while I still found Sister Location on the whole to be an enjoyable experience, I can't lie, maybe with the exception of the spring lock sequence, I find the gameplay here to be more engaging compared to the vast majority of the main game. I get this is part of the game, but with how this setup is repeated near identically in the custom nights, with only some new animatronics and mechanics introduced to spice things up, it's nothing like any of the gameplay we've seen up to this point. Now, when it comes to how we complete the night, we obviously need to reach 6 AM without running out of power or getting caught by the animatronics. We've only got one to deal with right now, and that's Ennard, who tries to make its way into our room from the left and right hallways, as well as the vent in front. And although we have our cameras back, we're still having to rely a great deal on the audio cues which it generates so we don't run out of power. The audio channels are key to figuring out where Enid is and how close it is to our office without using our cameras. The general pattern tends to be that if you hear her move once to the right, center, or left, you're safe to keep waiting. However, you hear a sound generated a second time consecutively, you should pull up your camera and check where it is. The only exception is when it's in the vent, as in the hallways, there's a chance it could have gone into another room nearby, whereas in the vent, it's only heading straight forward. As the night goes on, it does eventually become more aggressive. From 4 AM onward, its movements become a lot more sudden, meaning that no matter where it finds itself, hearing 2 audio effects from the same area should result in you closing your door straight away before checking your camera. It's relatively simple when you break it down, and once you know what all the audio cues mean, it should mainly be a matter of how well you conserve your power during the night. All the way throughout, we hear dialogue from Baby insisting that we let them inside the room, which mainly gives us problems in regards to hearing the audio effects from Enid.
If they find us like this, we won't be able to try again. You must help us. You must let us inside the room.
However, after a certain point, Baby's voice is replaced with Afton's daughter, which is likely the biggest piece of evidence that indicates Baby is in fact possessed by the daughter's soul. Not that it really matters in this case, to be honest. The idea of possession in the previous games was mainly used to explain why these animatronics were out to kill us. We know with these guys, they were literally programmed to kill, and have likely only changed their targets from kids to adults because of their want to use our body. Overall, I love the gameplay segment in the secret room. Although I'm not a fan of the whole Fnaf 4 tie-in, the amount of intrigue garnered from what we see here is undeniably massive. The gameplay, while simplistic, works really well. After a long time without them, it's great to finally see the return of things like the cameras and doors. I definitely think it's serving as fan service to a degree, but the gameplay and atmosphere do a good enough job to stand on their own as well. The visual of the dark room, illuminated solely by the TV screens, the menacing positions we find Enid in on the cameras, and some really strange similarities we can garner from many of the different areas we see. The black and white checkerboard flooring, the way camera 3 almost perfectly replicates the same camera 3 found in the first game. It's all very odd. There seems to be no real reason as to why this place so heavily emulates the restaurant found in Fnaf 1. But either way, it all works well on a visual, audio, and gameplay front. So good stuff all round. It's not easy whatsoever, especially when you're getting to grips with it. You can be left wondering about things like how many times a piece of audio needs to be played until you should close a door. But the simple mechanics still make it fun to go through every time. The ending we get here is referred to as the fake ending, and while perhaps being a bit more optimistic for Mike, getting to watch the finale of his show while enjoying some popcorn, we're shown right at the end that Enid has somehow made his way out the facility and followed us home. I don't even know what it means really, but I guess it's irrelevant considering it's non-canon. And I assume it was likely the release of the custom night mode that made people claim the ending was fake, because as we eventually see when completing many of these, there's a few key story details hidden amongst them, which give us clarity on certain characters and their motivations, as well as what happens to Mike after the real ending of the game. As for the mode itself, it was released a few months after the game's initial release, somewhat similar to the Halloween update for Fnaf 4. The night takes place in the exact same area as the one we just witnessed, and from our side of things, basically plays out the exact same as well. All we need to do is survive till 6 AM while retaining our power and not getting jump scared. The only new addition would be the oxygen meter, although only 2 animatronics really end up affecting it, both of which can be dealt with relatively easily. The most important part, of course, is the animatronics we go up against, and how they balance each other out. And for the most part, I think Sister Location's custom night is an excellent experience. Is it all that scary? No, and that's the only real downside. Even from how it's presented this time, with there being such a big emphasis on the different challenges, the amount of stars you earn for completing them on each sequential difficulty, it's clear that scares aren't really the intention. As has been the case ever since the first game, Cawthon wisely realizes the scares won't last forever. There's only so many times you can see the same visuals popping up and loud audio tracks playing until it just becomes annoying. So the custom night's all based on these new threats, and how far we can push ourselves in terms of difficulty. That idea is great already, but I love that even when it comes to the hardest challenge in the game, that being the returning Golden Freddy mode, the fact that we're able to play an easier version of the night to begin with works so well in not overwhelming the player right from the off. We only had that somewhat with the individual challenges in games like Fnaf 2, but again, those were only made easier because of how certain animatronics were taken out of the equation. Now we can actually practice all these unique challenges more effectively, and have it affect our progress somewhat, as although completing these on very hard is the only way to get all 4 stars, you can also earn the others by completing them on easy, normal, or hard. The gameplay of Custom Night is like an even more in-depth version version of our night with Ennard. As expected, each of the animatronics have their own set functions, and something I like about them all is how they're not only simple to understand, made even simpler by the fact their abilities are described on the custom night menu itself, but they're all noticeably unique. It's not a case of simply having to look at someone approaching a door and shutting it when they get too close. There's a good mix between audio cues and essential camera usage that creates a wonderful balance to the night. There's 10 animatronics in total, 6 of which are lethal, and 4 which are more like support animatronics. Many of these act very similar to other animatronics we've seen before. Funtime Foxy, for example, was exactly the same as Foxy from the first game, even having his own curtain on camera 7 we need to check on. Yendo acts the same as Golden Freddy in Fnaf 2, and drains your oxygen incredibly fast until you pull up the camera. Ballora and Freddy are entirely audio based, having to shut your door when Ballora's music comes very close, and also when Freddy shouts out for Bonbon to come get us.
Bonbon, go get him!
These two from an audio perspective are implemented superbly. Despite playing the same music on repeat, the volume levels when it comes to Ballora make it very clear when it's time to close the door. The music becomes the center of attention during this stage, whereas all the other stages merely indicate where it's coming in from. While Freddy tends to be a more simple case of merely closing the door his voice comes in from, there's 2 audio cues we need to worry about in this case. The first is purely him sending in Bonbon from the same position he's located in. However, the other includes him saying we're in for a surprise, which actually means Bonbon will enter through the opposite door.
Get ready for a surprise!
A fantastic concept, mixing in a formula we're generally familiar with by now, and having not just the audio matter, but also what line of dialogue's being read out. Everything's pretty standard, with many of these affecting our night in spite of our actions. The 2 mini Rena variants, for example, affect 1, our oxygen meter, and 2, our vision. This is where the controlled shock comes into play, as whenever they start messing with our oxygen, we need to focus on camera 6 and apply a shock, which we can do by either clicking the button on screen or pressing E on our keyboard. This is also the case for Electrobab, who appears on cameras 3 and 4, and increases the rate in which your power drains. Those shortcuts we can now use on our keyboard are excellent. Another simple yet effective evolution to the gameplay system that gives us even more control. Along with the shock button, we can now close all 3 doors with the letters A, W, and D. This not only saves time, which is incredibly effective in a series which is heavily focused on aspects like how fast you're able to react to threats, but you can also close these doors while looking at the cameras too, meaning that if Electrobab's draining your power while Bidybab's about to make his way into your room, you can deal with both these issues simultaneously. Talking to Bidybab, he's the only animatronic to make his way through the vents, and is once again solely reliant on audio cues basically. You can check on his progress with the cameras, but that would ultimately be a waste of power. All you need to know is that when you hear rumbling in your vents, you gotta close it until you hear a bash on the door, which then means it's safe to open once again. The last 2, those being Bonnet and Lolbit, are 2 concepts I don't believe we've seen before. Both are very simple, with Bonnet requiring you to click her nose whenever she runs across screen, and Lolbit requiring you to either type LOL on your keyboard or by clicking the corresponding letters on the keypad. And that's where we reach the culmination phase yet again, and witness how all these elements enhance the overall experience. When the mini Renas start clouding your screen, clicking on Bonnet's nose and seeing Lolbit becomes significantly harder. Dealing with those 2 elements can take a little bit of time that could potentially be costly if Electrobab and the other mini Renas are affecting your oxygen. Even more time could be stripped away if when you initially closed your camera and witnessed Bonnet and Lolbit, Yendo was standing in the corner. And while we're dealing with all this, we still need to keep an eye on Foxy while listening out to all the separate audio cues coming from the 3 different entrances, with Ballora being able to come in from both sides, and Freddy constantly being able to throw a surprise in the mix. If this all sounds a bit overwhelming, that's because it very much is. Golden Freddy mode on very hard is exactly the kind of extreme challenge you'd expect, but I'll be honest, I really enjoyed my time with all these. Much like my favourite iterations of the core FNAF gameplay systems, I love to see a flow presented in the gameplay, almost like you're working off a rhythm, and that can be felt in spades here. Never once did I feel scared with what I was experiencing, but that's quite literally not the point. While difficult at points, very difficult actually, I found the gameplay to be mostly enjoyable, no matter what challenge I was currently tackling or what difficulty I was playing on. Are there annoyances here? Of course. The mini Renas that cover up our screen are what I see as the most lazy animatronic of them all. I get their purpose, but dying because you couldn't hear a sound cue over their laugh, or being unable to see your mouse when clicking Bonnet's nose, it feels far more cheap compared to any of the others. With that being said, there's many other elements of the gameplay that I feel are immensely satisfying, shocking away the animatronics who are messing around with our night. Hearing the sounds of Bidybab and Bonbon hitting our doors.
Go get him!
I like the positive reinforcement we're given when dealing with many of these guys. It's not only informative, but actively encouraging. The shortcuts, as I already said, present a sense of speed and control to our actions that we've never quite felt before in this same context. There's once again a balance in place between all these guys, which is the key reason I kept coming back. The immense challenge presented at points is made to feel attainable because of how the animatronics individually behave and what threats they pose. So the custom night on the whole was fantastic, and I'm sorry to say, despite the more ambitious approach Cawthon took with the main part of the game, I found myself enjoying this return to the usual formula quite a bit more, admittedly. And not to mention as well, there's not purely an incentive presented from the stars now. There's now 8 cutscenes that we're able to witness by completing these challenges, 7 of which show the aftermath of Mike with Ennard living inside him, and the final one marking the special achievement of beating the Golden Freddy mode. All of these require you to beat them on very hard, and with the initial 7, we're shown the gradual disintegration of Mike's body, because of how he's now essentially a walking corpse. The way this decline is shown off is absolutely hilarious though. The ridiculous fanfare he receives when walking onto the street, with people smiling and waving at him, the happy-go-lucky smile and walk as he makes his way past everyone, and of course, when he starts looking a bit raggedy, the people stop smiling and waving, and instead look in almost utter confusion before outright leaving. By the final cutscene, Afton's turned into a full-on purple zombie. However, before he can make his way off screen like usual, his stomach starts rumbling, eventually resulting in the parts of Ennard exploding out of his mouth and into the drain. Bizarrely though, despite his puppet-like corpse lying on the ground, we start hearing the line "You won't die" get repeated several times from Baby, a line which was previously used for the secret room in Night 5.
You won't die, you won't die, you won't die, you won't die, you won't die.
And she seems to be right, as his reanimated corpse stands to attention, with us also being able to see the eyes of the animatronic parts in the sewer system below. These details are mostly important when it comes to the final cutscene of the game, as well as what we see occur in the penultimate game in the series. This final cutscene switches things up quite drastically, hearing dialogue from someone who calls themselves Michael, who we can assume is the same Michael Schmidt that we've been playing as. He addresses this message to his father, and very quickly we're made to understand that Mike Schmidt has actually been Mike Afton all this time.
Father, it's me, Michael. I did it. I found it. It was right where you said it would be. They were all there. They didn't recognize me at first, but then they thought I was you. And I found her. I put her back together. Just like you asked me to. She's free now. But something is wrong with me. I should be dead, but I'm not. I've been living in shadows. There is only one thing left for me to do now. I'm going to come find you. I'm going to come find you.
Firstly, aside from the clear connection that's made between his message being sent to his father and having that be directly related to the reintroduction of Springtrap, we can also hear that the exact same voice we heard of William at the start is being repurposed for Michael. So undoubtedly, the character we've been playing as the entire time is William's son. Adding to that, the mission he describes seems to be based around finding a girl, and with it being made clear that his sister's soul was contained inside Baby, his words make perfect sense. He did put her back together in a way by using his own body as a vessel, and assumedly, the idea of her being set free relates to what we saw in the previous cutscene. As we hear, with the absolute wreck he's now become, lying somewhere in between life and death, he sets about going to find William, who as we know, was last seen at the Fazbear Frights attraction. With how dark the cutscene is, you may not have even seen what we're looking at outside the reveal of Springtrap, but Fazbear Frights is exactly where this takes place. Here's a much clearer image of what's going on in the back. As you can see, the place is very much burned to the ground, but there's a slight question mark I should mention once again when it comes to how the place burned down. Originally, the cause was unknown, but if you remember, during The Immortal and the Restless, it's implied that someone was actually responsible. This leaves a whole raft of questions up in the air, none of which are fully confirmed. In the show, Clara's the one who claims to have burned down their house, aka Fazbear's Fright. So, who's Clara? While looking forward to the future, there was a book written by Cawthon in 2018 called The Five Nights at Freddy's Survival Logbook. Inside contained many cryptic messages, blood-stained pages, and mysterious drawings things. But in relation to this Clara mystery, we can see at the beginning of the book that it apparently belongs to Michael Afton, with the same red text always indicating when Mike is giving his input, almost like he's haunting the book. There's a page within it that asks the reader to write down their favourite characters from movies, books and TV shows, and in the TV section we can see Mike writes Clara from The Immortal and the Restless, because everything about this place is crazy and no one seems to notice except me. So there you have it, even Mike himself is shown to relate to Clara, so we can naturally assume now that's supposed to be him being represented. This means that to burn the place down, he must have already known where it was, which means the whole speech we hear during the cutscene is being delivered in the past tense, while the visuals on screen are obviously showing the aftermath, which fits in with the general timeline we've pieced together, in which FNAF 3 still remains the game set furthest in the future. So with that revelation, we've got some big reveals, some big questions getting answered, and some interesting things to think about when going back to the previous games. FNAF 1 now gets painted out in a completely different light. It's somewhat unclear why he chose to go and work at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, but we can now assume the reason the animatronics start coming after us isn't just because we're an adult, it's because we share a resemblance to the person who killed them. As for William, we now know he had both a son and daughter, both of which we've been completely unaware of up till now, leaving the door open for more potential discoveries in relation to their bloodline. Let's not forget, outside the insane nightmare connections in this game, the family we see in FNAF 4 didn't initially seem to be connected to anyone else in the series. However, now, it's not a far cry to say that both the crying child and older brother could potentially be two more sons of William. All interesting stuff, much of which eventually gets elaborated on and ultimately concluded in the next game. As for Sister Location on the whole though, I hate to say it, but I'm as mixed on this game as any of the others which came before it. I mean this mainly from a gameplay side of things. I think when it comes to animations, the sheer amount of environments we see, the many unique scenarios we're placed in, Cawthon thoroughly outdoes himself. All you need to do is go into the game files realistically to see this reflected. We go from around 1,000 or so PNGs getting used in the previous game to just over 7,000 getting used for Sister Location, many of which apply to the TV segments, but many also applying to the tons of animatronics we see, all their individual jump scares and so on. So from a visual point of view, the game excels without a doubt. Same goes for the audio, which ties into the gameplay front. Whereas FNAF 4 seemed like an effort that was completely focused on audio, there's a greater balance that gets established between the two mediums in this game, obviously being highlighted most prominently during the Ennard and Custom Night segments. And speaking of the Custom Night, I feel like what we see here, while not being the most fleshed out or in-depth version of the classic FNAF formula, may just be the most refined. While the camera is still being used fairly infrequently, it has a great deal of importance in regards to multiple animatronics, not just one. While FNAF 3 still has more strategy and relies more heavily on the camera, it misses out on the additional gameplay elements like the doors, which add to the intensity, depth and satisfaction I felt when playing the Custom Night. Audio still plays a very important role when figuring out where certain characters are and what doors we need to close. With the return of the power meter, our actions always have consequences no matter what we're doing or if we're currently surviving. Just like the first game, we could be safer and reach further into the night by closing all the doors, but we know that we'll never get to the end this way. And not to mention the unique threats. The only game to feature as many animatronics before this was FNAF 2, and as we discussed, 8 of those 11 basically behave in the exact same way. But there lies my biggest problem with Sister Location. My biggest takeaways from it are the visual and audio design, the story, and the Custom Night, all of which are great in their own right. But when it comes to the main gameplay experience, it's the most underwhelming of the lot. In making the game even more linear, we get so many gameplay scenarios that just aren't very interesting. I feel the replay value of Sister Location could be heavily impacted by this facet alone. Yeah, you could still get a fright from Ballora or Foxy when crawling through their rooms, but for me, the gameplay in both those instances wasn't all that engaging outside my first few attempts. It doesn't feel like there's any strategy to these, and if you want to try claim there is, it's about the most basic strategies you can imagine. Don't move when you hear a noise, flash to see that no one's there. You could argue FNAF 4 isn't far off, but there was so much more depth when it came to the animatronics dynamic. And even when it came to sitting at our doorways and waiting for audio to play, everything was made so raw and visceral that it amplified the gameplay exponentially. Sister Location doesn't have any of that in my opinion. The one thing I can appreciate is the level of variety. It's no longer a matter of doing the same thing each night with the difficulty increasing, but that's honestly about it. As I said during night 4, the Springlock section is likely my favourite in the whole game. Everything else on a gameplay front is made to feel a bit too binary. It's like it takes linear design principles to an absolute extreme. Press this button, go this way. At least in the previous games, we could choose what camera to look at, what door to close, where to position ourselves in our bedroom. The only thing we can do ourselves now is click on noses. So, a success in the main, but I'd have to still say the balance feels off in the main experience. It feels like Cawthon trying something new, and not getting it quite right.